Most people think money is a numbers problem. They think if they could just earn a little more, save a little more, invest a little more, the equation would finally balance. And so they chase the numbers. They read the books. They watch the videos. They build the spreadsheets. And still, at the end of each year, they find themselves in roughly the same place they were at the beginning of it. Not because they are not trying, they are exhausted from trying, but because they are solving the wrong problem entirely. Money is not a numbers problem. Money is an identity problem. And until you understand that, truly understand it, not just as an interesting idea, but as a structural reality about how abundance actually moves through a human life, you will keep doing everything right and wondering why nothing is changing. I have been sitting with this truth for 37 years, studying it, teaching it, watching it prove itself over and over in the lives of the people who come to me. And today I am going to share with you the framework that the ancient Jewish wisdom tradition built around this exact question. The question of why some people seem to be naturally magnetized to prosperity, while others, equally talented and often far more disciplined, seem to repel it without meaning to. This framework is not new. It is not modern. It predates every self-help book ever written by centuries. But it has never been more urgently needed than it is right now. Because we are living in a moment where more information about money is available than at any time in human history. And yet the gap between people who are thriving financially and people who are struggling is wider than it has ever been. The information was never the problem. The identity is the problem. And the ancient sages knew exactly what to do about it. My name is Rabbi Naomi. I was ordained within a lineage that traces its teaching directly back through the great Kabbalistic masters, through the Vilna Gaon, through the Baal Shem Tov, through the schools of the Zohar, and before them, back to the oral traditions that accompanied the written Torah itself. I did not choose this work the way one chooses a career. I was called into it the way one is called by a name, suddenly, and without the option of refusal. I was 23 years old, newly settled in Jerusalem, studying in a small seminary near the Old City, when I was introduced to the teachings of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, whose 18th century masterwork on inner refinement changed everything I thought I understood about the relationship between who a person is and what a person receives. I spent the next 4 years reading almost nothing else. I filled 3 journals with questions and notes and arguments with the text. And slowly, across those years, something that had always felt like 2 separate conversations, the spiritual life and the material life, collapsed into one. Because the Ramchal was saying, with absolute precision and no mystical vagueness whatsoever, that abundance is not granted to behavior. Abundance flows to identity, to who you have become at the level of character, of inner structure, of what the tradition calls your tselem, your divine image, your truest form. I want to tell you about a man I worked with whose situation will sound familiar to many of you watching this. His name was David. He was 41 years old when he first contacted me. He had built 2 businesses from nothing, one in his late 20s, one in his mid-30s, and both had reached a certain height and then stalled, not collapsed, not failed in any dramatic way, simply stopped growing. He described it as hitting an invisible ceiling. He would push, the business would push back. He would bring in more clients, and something elsewhere would fall apart. He would solve one problem, and 3 others would appear. He was exhausted. He was skilled. He was clearly not lazy. This was a man who had started 2 businesses from zero. And yet the prosperity he had imagined for himself, the kind of financial freedom he had been building toward, remained just out of reach. He told me, on a phone call late on a Thursday evening, that he had begun to wonder whether he was simply not built for the level of success he wanted, whether some people just had it and others did not. I told him that was the most important thing he had ever said to me, not because it was true, but because it was a window into the precise location of his block. He had unconsciously accepted an identity that was incompatible with the level of abundance he was trying to create. He was building with his hands and dismantling with his beliefs. And the ancient tradition has a name for this phenomenon. It is called the contraction of the vessel. The idea comes directly from the Kabbalistic concept of Tzimtzum, the primordial contraction, which describes how the infinite divine light withdraws to create space for a finite world to exist. But in the context of personal abundance, the sages taught that a human being can perform their own self-contraction. They can unconsciously shrink the vessel of their identity to a size that cannot hold the prosperity they are seeking. And when that happens, no amount of effort changes the outcome. You can pour blessing into a contracted vessel, and it will simply overflow the sides. Not because the blessing is absent, because the vessel is too small. David and I worked together for 4 months. Not 4 months of strategy, not 4 months of business coaching, 4 months of what the tradition calls avodat hanefesh, the work of the soul, directed specifically at expanding the identity structures that were creating the ceiling he kept hitting. I assigned him specific texts to study, specific daily practices drawn from the Musar tradition, which is the Jewish character development discipline that was systematized in 19th century Lithuania, and which remains one of the most sophisticated frameworks for inner transformation that any civilization has ever produced. Within 6 weeks, something began to shift, not in his business, but in him. He described it as a loosening, a sense of permission he had not known he was withholding from himself. By the end of the 3rd month, his revenue had grown by an amount that surprised him. Not because he had worked harder, he had actually worked less. But he had become someone different. And prosperity follows who you are, not merely what you do. Now I want to take you into the framework itself, because this is not just a story about one man. This is a map. A precise and navigable map that the sages built over centuries, and that I am going to lay out for you as clearly as I possibly can. There are 3 pillars to what I call the identity code of prosperity. The first pillar is recognition. The second is permission. The third is structure. Each one is necessary. None of them alone is sufficient, and they must be built in order. Because you cannot give yourself permission for something you have not first recognized as rightfully yours, and you cannot hold what you have claimed without the structure to contain it. Let us begin with recognition. In the Musar tradition, the foundational practice of recognition is called cheshbon hanefesh, the accounting of the soul. It is, on its surface, a practice of honest self-examination. You study your patterns. You notice where you act with alignment and where you act from fear. You trace the roots of your habitual responses to money, where they came from, what they were trying to protect, what they cost you. But this practice is not therapy, and it is not self-criticism. In fact, the Musar masters were very clear on this point. The purpose of cheshbon hanefesh is not to condemn the self, but to see it clearly. Because what you can see, you can address. What remains in shadow controls you without your consent. What I have found in working with hundreds of people on this exact practice is that almost every person carries at least one inherited belief about money that does not belong to them. It was handed down from a parent, a grandparent, a community, a culture, and at some point in early life, it was absorbed without examination and allowed to masquerade as personal truth. Beliefs like, money is hard to come by. People like us do not become wealthy. Wanting more than you have is a form of ingratitude. Success requires sacrifice of the things that actually matter. These beliefs are not trivial. They are structural. They function like load-bearing walls inside the architecture of identity. And when you try to build a life of abundance on top of them without addressing them, the ceiling they create is not metaphorical. It is experienced as a physical reality. It is the ceiling David kept hitting. It is the invisible force that takes money from people just as they begin to accumulate it. Recognition means going into the structure and finding those walls, naming them. Not destroying them yet, just naming them. Because recognition alone, when done with the precision the tradition demands, begins the loosening. The second pillar is permission. This is the one that most people resist the longest, and I want to speak about it carefully because it is frequently misunderstood. Permission in this context does not mean permission from another person. It does not mean entitlement. It does not mean that you simply decide you deserve to be wealthy and then expect wealth to arrive. That is not what the tradition is describing. Permission is an inner act. It is the moment when you stop arguing with your own prosperity. When you stop, consciously or unconsciously, dismantling the good that is trying to reach you. And this is harder than it sounds, because most of the dismantling happens beneath the level of conscious awareness. This is the behavior of someone who is not yet in relationship with their own receiving capacity. And it is worth examining honestly whether that description fits you. Not as a judgment, as a diagnosis. Because a diagnosis is information, and information is the beginning of change. The sages describe this inner permission through the concept of bitachon, trust or confidence in the divine. Not passive fatalism, not the idea that you do not have to work, but a deep structural trust that the universe is not your adversary, that abundance is not scarce, that someone else's prosperity does not diminish your own, that you are not required to apologize for receiving. Bitachon is not a feeling you generate, it is a practice you build. The Hazon Ish, the great 20th century halachic authority, Rabbi Avraham Yeshayahu Karelitz, wrote with extraordinary precision about bitachon, distinguishing it clearly from wishful thinking and clarifying that genuine trust is inseparable from action. You act, fully and with all your capacity, and then you release the outcome with open hands. This combination, complete effort plus complete release, is the inner posture of someone whose vessel is open to receive. Most people manage one or the other. Very few manage both simultaneously. And that combination is exactly what the identity code is designed to help you build. The third pillar is structure. And this is where the ancient wisdom and the practical world must meet. Because structure is not merely spiritual. Structure is material. It is the container that holds what recognition and permission have made possible. In the Kabbalistic teaching on the nature of vessels, which reaches its fullest expression in the work of the Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, in 16th century Safed, the fundamental teaching is that divine light can only be held by a vessel that was built to receive it. When the vessels shattered, in the mystical account of creation, it was not because the light was too powerful in an absolute sense. It was because the vessels had not yet been refined to the necessary level of strength and specificity. And the entire work of repair, what the tradition calls tikkun, is the work of building vessels strong enough, specific enough, and refined enough to hold increasing levels of light. In practical terms, this means that prosperity requires infrastructure. Not just the infrastructure of budgets and investments, though those matter and I will not dismiss them, but the infrastructure of character. The infrastructure of reliable habits, of honest speech, of the capacity to honor commitments, of the willingness to delay gratification, not out of deprivation, but out of vision. The Musar tradition maps this infrastructure with extraordinary precision across the 48 qualities that the Mishnah identifies as the prerequisites for receiving wisdom. And when you study that list, qualities like patience, joy, a small footprint, knowing one's place, a good heart, deliberate speech, you realize that the sages were not describing a spiritual ideal. They were describing the character of a person whose identity is structured to receive and to hold. This is the third pillar. And without it, recognition and permission produce what I have seen again and again in people who do deep inner work but neglect the outer structure. A beautiful, expanded inner life and a financial reality that has not caught up because the vessel that was supposed to hold the overflow was never actually built. Now, I need to warn you about something, because if I do not, many of you will encounter what I am about to describe, and you will conclude that the work is not working. When you begin to move through these three pillars, when you begin the genuine accounting of your soul, when you start to extend permission to yourself to receive, when you begin building the structural containers, you will be tested. The test will arrive in the form of a situation that looks exactly like proof that nothing has changed. An expense, a loss, a betrayal, a setback that hits at precisely the moment you have begun to feel something opening. This is not coincidence. This is not the universe punishing your ambition. This is the pattern defending itself. I have seen it too many times to be surprised by it. Every person I have ever guided through serious inner work has encountered this test. The ones who understood what it was, who named it and kept moving, came through to the other side. The ones who took the test as confirmation of their old identity, who said, "See, I knew this could not work for me." They handed the test a victory it did not earn. Do not hand it that victory. Name it. Keep going. The complete architecture of what I have outlined today, the full identity code framework, the Keshbon HaNefesh practice adapted for modern financial life, the Bitachon building practices, the vessel construction exercises drawn from the Lurianic tradition, the specific Musar character work for each of the qualities that structure a prosperity-ready identity. All of it is available in the program I have built called the Prosperity Letters. The link is waiting for you in the description below. I built it because this work matters too much to keep inside a seminar room. I built it because David was not unusual. He was representative. There are thousands of people carrying his exact ceiling, hitting it with the exact same confusion and exhaustion. And the ceiling is not made of circumstance. It is made of identity. And identity is the one thing in a human life that is entirely and completely available to change. If something in this teaching cracked something open for you today, if the idea of the contracted vessel, or the three pillars, or the test that comes before the breakthrough, if any of it landed somewhere real and true in you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me which of the three pillars you feel most drawn to work on first: recognition, permission, or structure. Your answer will tell me a great deal about where your work begins. And I respond to as many comments as I can, because this is a conversation I take seriously. Your comment also tells this channel that this content matters, and that signal reaches people who need this and have not found it yet. If this is your first time here, I want to invite you to subscribe. What I offer on this channel is consistent teaching, not entertainment, not hype, not the performance of wisdom. Just the tradition, brought forward with as much precision and care as I am able. The teachings I share are drawn from primary sources that most people never encounter. When you subscribe, they come to you steadily, in sequence, in a way that compounds across time the same way that properly structured capital compounds. One teaching builds on the last. The architecture grows. And if this video gave you something of real value today, something you will still be thinking about tomorrow or next week, I ask you to press the like. Not as a favor to me, as a statement. As a small but genuine act of the circulation principle, the understanding, rooted deep in this tradition, that what you amplify returns to you amplified. A like says, this matters, and what matters deserves to reach further. May the recognition begin in you this week. May you find, in the honest accounting of your soul, not condemnation, but clarity. May the permission you have been withholding from yourself be extended, gently, precisely, and without apology. May the vessels you begin to build have walls strong enough to hold everything that is already trying to find its way to you. You are not starting from nothing. The abundance that belongs to your life has been accumulating, held in trust, waiting for the identity that can receive it. That identity is not far from you. It is closer than you think. And the work of reaching it begins, always, exactly where you are.
And if you are sitting with a sense of doubt right now, if a voice is telling you that this is interesting, but probably not for you, that your situation is different, that your ceiling is real and permanent, I want to speak to that voice directly. Not to dismiss it, but to name it for exactly what it is. That voice is not protecting you. That voice is the contracted vessel speaking. It is the old identity defending the only world it knows. It has kept you safe from disappointment in the past by keeping you safe from expansion. And it is very good at its job. But its job description was written a long time ago by a version of you that did not yet have what you now have, which is the understanding that the ceiling is constructed, and constructed things can be taken apart. Not all at once, not painlessly, but completely. The tradition is not gentle about this. It is honest. The work is real work. The opening is a real opening. And what tends to follow, for people who commit to this path with seriousness and patience, is a life that looks from the outside like luck, and feels from the inside like finally arriving somewhere you always knew you were supposed to be. That is what I want for you. That arrival, that recognition, that quiet, unglamorous, profoundly life-altering moment when money stops being something you chase and starts being something that recognizes you, because you have finally, fully recognized yourself.